My name is Olivia Bennett, and when I returned from 6 years building our West Coast operations into a thriving $20 million division, I discovered my father had written me out of his will entirely. After dedicating my entire career to expanding Bennett Media Group and sacrificing my personal life for our family business, I came home to my father's funeral only to learn my younger brother David would inherit everything while I got nothing. What the family attorney uncovered in my father's private study changed everything and forced my family to confront the truth they'd been hiding for decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The commercial flight touched down at Reagan National Airport on a brisk October morning. Unlike my previous homecomings, there was no welcoming committee this time. No father with his booming voice and bear hugs, proudly introducing my brilliant daughter, the executive. No mother fussing over how thin I looked after too many late nights at the office. Just me, my carry-on luggage, and the hollow ache in my chest that had been my constant companion since receiving the call 2 weeks ago. William Bennett, founder and CEO of Bennett Media Group, had suffered a massive stroke at his desk. He died doing what he loved, running the media empire he'd built from a small radio station into a regional powerhouse with television, digital, and print divisions across 3 states. The business had been my father's life, and I had followed in his footsteps, taking our struggling West Coast division from near bankruptcy to becoming our most profitable operation when others said it couldn't be saved. I shifted uncomfortably in my tailored black pantsuit as I navigated the familiar terminal. 6 months earlier, I had been in Los Angeles overseeing the acquisition of a struggling digital news platform that would complete our West Coast multimedia strategy. The acquisition had been my baby, researched, negotiated, and executed under my leadership, with my father's enthusiastic backing despite board hesitation. The subsequent success had been my crowning achievement, transforming Bennett Media Group from a traditional broadcasting company into a modern digital enterprise with diversified revenue streams. Olivia. My brother David stood near baggage claim, his expression a practiced mask of somber greeting. At 34, 2 years my junior, he looked every inch the East Coast media executive in his perfectly tailored suit and meticulously styled hair. David, I replied, accepting his brief embrace. The formality between us was nothing new. We'd been more business associates than siblings since childhood. How's Mom holding up? As well as can be expected, he said, taking my carry-on. The house has been flooded with visitors, industry people, family friends, the usual condolence circuit. I nodded, swallowing the complicated emotions his detached description stirred. My father deserved more than being reduced to a condolence circuit. You look tired, he commented as we walked to the parking garage. The Los Angeles division keeping you busy? We just closed the Skyview digital acquisition, I replied. It's been around-the-clock work integrating their operations while maintaining their innovative culture. Dad mentioned it at the last board meeting, David said, his tone carefully neutral. Quite an investment. An investment already showing returns, I pointed out. First quarter projections show a 22% increase in digital ad revenue and a 15% growth in subscription services. David merely nodded as we reached his sleek black Mercedes. The drive to my parents' home in Bethesda, Maryland, took nearly 40 minutes, filled with awkward small talk about the funeral arrangements, which executives would be attending, and the expected media coverage. What David didn't mention was any discussion of the company's future leadership, a glaring omission that made my stomach tighten with apprehension. The 2-story colonial looked exactly as I remembered. Immaculate landscaping, classic architecture, the elegant yet understated wealth that had characterized my upbringing. As we pulled into the circular driveway, my mother appeared at the front door, her slim figure silhouetted against the warm light from inside. Olivia, She embraced me with surprising strength for her delicate frame. "You're finally home." Home. The word felt both comforting and strange after years of building my life in Los Angeles. "I came as soon as I could finalize the acquisition. Paperwork," I said, blinking back unexpected tears. "How are you really doing, Mom?" Catherine Bennett studied my face, her own grief evident in the new lines around her eyes. "Managing, darling. Your father would have expected nothing less." The house was filled with flower arrangements and catering trays, evidence of the steady stream of mourners who had been paying their respects. Family photos lined the entrance hall. My father's life displayed chronologically from young radio, announcer to media mogul. I paused at a photo of him standing proudly beside me at my college graduation, his hand on my shoulder, his expression radiating pride as I held my business degree. "That was a good day," my mother said, following my gaze. "He told everyone at the country club his daughter was going to revolutionize the family business someday." A lump formed in my throat. He was my biggest champion. "Yes," she agreed, though something in her expression seemed guarded. "He was very proud of what you accomplished in California." The subtle past tense wasn't lost on me. Dinner that evening was a small family affair. Just Mom, David, his wife Jennifer, and me. It should have been a moment of intimate grief-sharing, but an undercurrent of tension made the meal uncomfortable. "David has been incredible these past 2 weeks," my mother said, breaking a lengthy silence, "handling the company transition while making all the funeral arrangements." "The board has been supportive," David added, not quite meeting my eyes. "They understand the need for stability during this difficult time." The phrasing sent a chill through me. "What kind of transition arrangements are being made?" I asked. Carefully. My mother and David exchanged glances. "Perhaps this isn't the time for business discussions," my mother suggested. "We have the reading of the will tomorrow. Everything will be clarified then." "I think I deserve to know if decisions about the company's future are already being made," I persisted, "especially regarding the West Coast operations I've been leading." "Your division won't be affected," David assured me with a confidence that only heightened my concern. "Day-to-day operations will continue as usual." "Under whose leadership?" I wanted to ask, but something in my mother's expression stopped me. This wasn't the time for a confrontation, not with her grief still so raw. "The acquisition integration requires consistent oversight," I said instead. "My team is expecting direction on next steps." "The executive committee can handle any immediate decisions," David replied smoothly. "After tomorrow, we can discuss longer-term arrangements." The implication was clear. He already knew what tomorrow's reading would reveal, and it gave him the authority to make these assurances. Later that night, unable to sleep in the perfectly preserved guest room that had once been my childhood bedroom, I made my way downstairs for tea. The house was quiet, most lights dimmed, but a soft glow came from beneath my father's study door. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but hearing my name stopped me cold. "Olivia's going to be blindsided tomorrow," David was saying, his voice low but intense. I recognized the cadence of him pacing. 3 steps, pause, turn, repeat. A habit. From childhood, whenever he was strategizing, my mother's voice replied, too soft for me to make out the words. "It's too late to change anything now," David continued. "Dad made his decision, and the lawyers say it's airtight. Bennett Media Group comes to me, all of it, not just the East Coast operations. She gets the profit sharing we discussed, but no controlling interest." Another murmured response from my mother. "Of course she'll be upset. She's spent her entire career expecting to at least co-lead the company someday." But Dad was clear. The company needs unified leadership, not bi-coastal division that would eventually tear it apart. I backed away, my hands shaking, tea forgotten. The brutal clarity of what I'd overheard left no room for misinterpretation. My father, who had sent me to California to save our failing West Coast division, who had celebrated every milestone of its turnaround, who had called me weekly to discuss strategy and future plans, had left me nothing but profit sharing. No leadership role, no controlling interest, no recognition of 6 years of 70-hour weeks and sacrificed relationships. As I returned to my room, a strange calm replaced my initial shock. Was I really surprised? Hadn't there been signs? The board meetings where my innovative proposals met with traditional resistance. My father's reluctance to formalize a succession plan despite my gentle prompting. His constant praise of my operational successes coupled with subtle remarks about my creative approach perhaps being too progressive for our core audience. I stared at the ceiling, my future suddenly as uncertain as the shadows shifting across the walls. Tomorrow, I decided, I would begin looking at executive positions outside the family business. Whatever happened next, I couldn't remain at Bennett Media Group as a glorified employee, watching my brother dismantle the modernization strategy I'd championed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What I didn't know then was that the true revelation waiting for me had nothing to do with money, media empires, or corporate leadership. It was hidden in my father's private study, in a locked drawer he thought no one would ever open. Morning. Light filtered through the guest room curtains, waking me from a fitful sleep punctuated by dreams of board meetings where I was suddenly voiceless. I reached for my phone, checking emails from my California team out of habit. Several urgent messages awaited response. Integration challenges, personnel questions, strategic decisions that couldn't wait. I answered them systematically, saying nothing about the impending change in leadership. What could I say when I had no official information yet? I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that had seen me through countless negotiations with reluctant investors. If I was to be professionally diminished, I would at least face it with dignity. The house was quiet as I made my way downstairs. My mother sat alone at the kitchen island, a cup of tea cooling before her, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed what looked like funeral seating arrangements. "You're up early," she commented, removing her glasses. "Would you like coffee? I can ask Maria to make some." "I can manage," I replied, moving to the elaborate espresso machine my father had imported from Italy. Some of my earliest childhood memories involved watching him operate it with ceremonial precision each morning. I found comfort in following the same ritual now. "The car will be here at 9 to take us to Richard's office," my mother said, referring to Richard Anderson, the family attorney who had handled my father's personal and business affairs for 3 decades. "Is David coming separately?" I asked, noticing his absence. "He had an early meeting with the board chairman," she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "He'll meet us at Richard's office." "A board meeting before the will reading?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Seems premature." My mother sighed, finally looking at me directly. "Olivia, your father made his decisions carefully, with the company's best interests at heart. Whatever we learn today..." "I already know what..." "We'll learn today," I interrupted, setting my coffee cup down with more force than intended. David made sure of that. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "You overheard." "Enough to know I've been written out of any meaningful role at the company I helped build." "Was that Dad's idea? Or did David convince him while I was 3,000 miles away saving our West Coast operations?" "That's unfair," my mother said quietly. "Your father valued your contributions enormously. Just not enough to trust me with leadership." It wasn't about trust, Olivia. It was about his vision for the company's future. David has been working directly with the board, the East Coast advertisers, the political connections that keep our broadcasting licenses secure. Your father believed centralized leadership would be stronger than divided authority. And my success building the digital division modernizing our revenue model, securing our future relevance, that counted for nothing? My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away, not ready for reconciliation. It counted for a great deal. The profit-sharing arrangement reflects that. Profit sharing, I repeated bitterly. Like a valued employee rather than a partner. The car arrived before she could respond, ending a conversation that was leading nowhere productive. We rode to Richard Anderson's office in silence, each lost in private thoughts. Anderson and Associates occupied the top floor of a prestigious Georgetown building, the firm's decades of handling wealthy families' complex legal matters, evident in the tasteful opulence of its reception area. Richard himself greeted us, his imposing height and silver hair lending him the gravitas perfect for his role. He had known me since childhood, had handled my first property purchase, my divorce 3 years ago, and countless company matters in between. Olivia. He clasped my hand in both of his, genuine warmth in his expression. It's good to see you, despite the circumstances. Your father spoke of your California successes often, and with tremendous pride. The simple acknowledgement of my father's pride meant more than it should have. David was already waiting in the conference room, along with Jennifer and 2 junior associates from Richard's firm who would serve as witnesses. Formalities were observed, condolences exchanged, water and coffee offered and declined. Then, Richard opened the heavy leather portfolio containing my father's last wishes, and the proceedings began in earnest. The initial provisions were standard and unsurprising. My mother received the family home, the vacation property in Maine, and substantial investment accounts to ensure her continued comfort. Various charitable bequests were noted, along with smaller gifts to longtime employees. Then came the business provisions. As I'd overheard, David was named CEO and majority shareholder of Bennett Media Group. I received continued directorship of the West Coast division at the discretion of the CEO, a minority shareholding of 15%, and what was described as appropriate profit participation. I sat perfectly still, my expression carefully neutral, even as the formal confirmation landed like a physical blow. Not only had I been denied leadership of the company I'd helped transform, but my continued role leading even my own division now depended on my brother's discretion. "Are there any questions?" Richard asked, looking at each of us in turn. "Just one," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Was any explanation provided for this particular distribution of company assets?" Richard adjusted his reading glasses. "Your father included a letter of explanation that I'm instructed to give each of you privately after the formal reading concludes." David shifted in his chair, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Clearly, this private letter hadn't been part of what he'd discussed with our father. After the reading concluded and the junior associates had witnessed our signatures on various documents, Richard asked us to wait while he retrieved the letters from his private safe. My mother and Jennifer stepped out to the reception area for coffee, leaving David and me alone in uncomfortable silence. "I know this isn't what you expected," he finally said. "Don't," I replied simply. "There's nothing you can say that will make this feel less like betrayal." "Betrayal?" He looked genuinely surprised. Dad made a business decision about what would be best for the company's future. The East Coast operations represent 70% of our traditional revenue, and the West Coast digital division represents 85% of our growth and future sustainability, I countered. "But this isn't really about business metrics, is it? It's about who spent the last 6 years at headquarters, attending the right country club, playing golf with the board members, while I was across the country actually innovating." "That's not fair," he began, but Richard's return spared me his justifications. Richard handed each of us a sealed envelope with our names written in our father's distinctive handwriting. "Your father asked that you read these privately," he explained. "I'll give you each a separate conference room." The junior associate led me to a smaller meeting room down the hall, leaving me alone with the envelope that supposedly explained why my father had disregarded years of grooming me for leadership. With slightly trembling hands, I broke the seal. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then our time together has been cut short, and I've failed to have the conversation I'd been postponing for too long. For that, I must first ask your forgiveness. I imagine you're feeling betrayed by the contents of my will. The decision to name David as my successor at Bennett Media Group will seem, on its surface, to be a rejection of your extraordinary contributions and leadership potential. It is anything but. What you don't know, what no one knows except Richard, is that for the past 2 years, I've been quietly investigating serious financial irregularities within our East Coast operations. Someone at the highest levels of our company has been systematically diverting advertising revenue, manipulating books, and compromising our journalistic integrity through undisclosed arrangements with political interests. The evidence points to a network of corruption that includes several board members and senior executives, with possible connections to regulatory officials who oversee our broadcasting licenses. The implications for Bennett Media Group, if this became public, would be catastrophic. Not just financial ruin, but criminal liability and the destruction of everything we've built. I sent you to California not just to save our struggling operations there, but to keep you safely away from this developing crisis. Your success there exceeded my wildest expectations, but it also confirmed what I already knew. You are the true future of this company, with the vision and integrity to lead it through the challenges ahead. The will you heard today is not the complete document. There is a codicil, known only to Richard, that activates 60 days after my death. It establishes you as the controlling shareholder and chairman of Bennett Media Group, with full authority to investigate and clean house as necessary. Why this elaborate deception? Because whoever is behind this corruption must believe they've won. They must believe David, who I've deliberately kept somewhat isolated from the company's financial operations, will be easy to manipulate and control. For the next 60 days, they need to operate as if nothing has changed, giving you time to gather conclusive evidence before they can destroy it. I've arranged for a private investigator's complete files to be delivered to you. The safe in my home study. The combination is your birthday followed by your mother's. Contains additional documentation and a secure phone with contact information for federal authorities I've cautiously established relationships with. I couldn't tell you this while I lived because it would have put you in danger. I couldn't tell your mother or David because their reactions would have alerted those involved. Richard knows only that there's a codicil. He doesn't know the details of what I've uncovered. You were never second choice, Olivia. You were my only choice for securing the company's future. The next 60 days will require every bit of the strategic brilliance and courage you've demonstrated throughout your career. Trust no one completely until you know who's involved. Not the board, not our executives, not even David. I'm so sorry to leave you with this burden, but I know no one more capable of bearing it. With absolute faith in you, Dad. I sat back, the letter trembling in my hands, my mind racing to process its implications. The betrayal I'd felt moments ago transformed into a complex mix of emotions, vindication that my father had valued, me as I'd hoped, horror at what he'd discovered, and overwhelming anxiety about the responsibility now placed squarely on my shoulders. The company wasn't being taken from me. It was being entrusted to me in the most profound way possible. But first, I had to play the role of the disappointed daughter, the sidelined executive, while secretly preparing for a corporate war. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my inner jacket pocket. Whatever happened next, I needed to control my reactions. Anyone watching me leave this room should see only a woman coming to terms with professional disappointment, not someone who had just discovered a potential conspiracy at the heart of her family business. When I returned to the main conference room, David was already there, his expression unreadable. Had his letter contained the same revelations, or was he being kept in the dark for his own protection and to maintain the charade? "Are you okay?" my mother asked, studying my face with concern. "I'll be fine," I replied, the ambiguity of the statement serving my purposes perfectly. Dad explained his reasoning. "I may not agree with all of it, but I respect that he made the decision he thought best for the company." David looked visibly relieved, clearly having expected a more contentious response. "I hope we can work together through this transition," he offered. "Your expertise in digital operations remains invaluable." "Of course," I agreed with a calm I didn't feel. "The company's success has always been my priority." Richard watched our exchange with the inscrutable expression of a man who knew more than he could say. "There are additional documents for each of you to sign," he said, steering the conversation back to practicalities. "Standard transfers of authority, banking permissions, and so forth." The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur of signatures and legal terminology. My mind was elsewhere, already cataloging what I knew, what I needed to learn, and how I would navigate the treacherous 60 days ahead. As we prepared to leave, Richard asked me to stay behind briefly to clarify some California operational questions. David hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with this private conversation, but ultimately left with our mother after Richard assured him it was merely procedural. When the door closed, Richard's formal demeanor shifted subtly. "I can't discuss the contents of your father's letter," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that whatever instructions he left you, I'm available to provide any legal support required." "Thank you," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Did my father leave anything else for me? Any additional materials?" Richard nodded almost imperceptibly. "A package will be delivered to your hotel room this afternoon. The courier has been instructed to hand it to you personally, with ID verification." "My hotel room? I'm staying at my mother's house." "Your father was explicit that you should relocate to a hotel immediately after the reading," Richard explained. "He reserved a suite at the Four Seasons under the name Olivia Carter. The reservation confirmation is in this envelope." He handed me a plain white business envelope. The level of detail in my father's planning was both impressive and unnerving. He had anticipated everything, including that I would need a private base of operations away from the family home. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked. Richard considered the question carefully. "Your father was a brilliant strategist who loved this company and his family fiercely. Whatever he set in motion, he believed it was the only viable path forward." "And you? What do you believe?" "I believe William Bennett chose the right person for whatever challenge lies ahead." He extended his hand formally. "Good luck, Olivia." I left the law office, with my mind racing, hyper-aware of everyone around me. The town car driver who might report my movements, the receptionist whose computer screen I couldn't see, even my mother, who watched me with concern as we rode back to the house in silence. "You're taking this better than I expected," she finally said as we turned onto our street. "What choice do I have?" I replied, the half-truth coming easily. "The decision is made." "Your father valued your contributions enormously," she insisted. "The profit-sharing arrangement is extremely generous." I nodded non-committally, wondering how much my mother knew. Was she completely in the dark about the financial irregularities? Or was her insistence on accepting the will's terms motivated by fear of what might be uncovered? "I think I'll stay at a hotel tonight," I said casually as we pulled into the driveway. "Give myself some space to process everything before the funeral tomorrow." She looked surprised, but didn't object. "If that's what you need? Though you know you're always welcome here." "I know. I just need some time alone to think about next steps." Another half-truth. "I'll need to update my team in California. Consider what this means for our operations." Inside, I packed quickly, taking only what I needed for a few days. As I zipped my suitcase, I paused, considering whether to try accessing my father's safe before leaving. The risk seemed too great. If anyone discovered me in his study, questions would be raised. better to wait until I understood more about what I was facing. I called a rideshare instead of using the family driver, another small precaution against having my movements tracked. At the Four Seasons, I checked in under the name Olivia Carter, presenting the confirmation Richard had provided. The front desk staff showed no reaction to the discrepancy between my ID and the reservation name, suggesting my father had arranged this detail as well. The suite was on the top floor, with views of the Potomac and exceptional security features. Keycard access to the floor, multiple locks on the door, and a sophisticated safe in the closet. My father had chosen well. Precisely at 3 o'clock, a knock came at the door. Through the peephole, I saw a professional-looking courier holding a package and a digital signature pad. After carefully checking his credentials and having him verify he was looking specifically for Olivia Carter, I accepted the package, a heavy briefcase secured with a combination lock. The note attached contained only a 6-digit number, my mother's birthday. Inside the briefcase was a trove of damning information: financial records showing systematic discrepancies in advertising revenue reporting, emails between board members discussing regulatory arrangements, and most disturbingly, evidence that our news division had killed several major investigative stories due to pressure from political figures with connections to our chairman of the board, Thomas Harrington. A separate thumb drive contained the private investigator's complete files, including surveillance photos, recorded conversations, and background checks on key executives. The picture it painted was devastating. A core group of Bennett Media Group's leadership had essentially turned portions of our news operations into protection rackets, trading favorable coverage for regulatory favors while skimming millions from advertising revenues through shell companies. At the center of it all was Marcus Reynolds, our chief financial officer and my father's trusted lieutenant for 20 years. The man who had mentored David since he joined the company. The man who would now have near-complete financial control if David became CEO. A secure phone, as promised in my father's letter, contained only 3 contacts labeled Federal 1, Federal 2, and PI. A note explained that Federal 1 was an FBI agent specializing in corporate crime, Federal 2 was with the FCC's Enforcement Division, and PI was the private investigator my father had hired. All had been vetted extensively for integrity and lack of connection to anyone at Bennett Media Group. I spent hours absorbing the materials, constructing a mental map of the corruption network. By midnight, my hotel room looked like a scene from a detective movie. Documents spread across every surface, notes covering the hotel stationery, connections drawn on the bathroom mirror with a washable marker. The scope of the problem was even worse than my father's letter had indicated. This wasn't just financial fraud, it was a comprehensive corruption of our company's fundamental purpose. Our news division, once respected for journalistic integrity, had become a tool for political manipulation. Our advertising department was being used to launder influence and money. Even our community outreach programs had been weaponized to pressure local officials in markets where we operated. Most concerning was evidence suggesting the conspiracy had accelerated its timeline recently. Notes from the private investigator indicated unusual financial movements in the weeks before my father's stroke. Large transfers to offshore accounts, hastily scheduled meetings between board members and regulatory officials, and a significant increase in deleted emails from key executives' accounts. Had they somehow caused my father's stroke? The thought sent a chill through me. The medical examiner had found nothing suspicious, but if these people were willing to corrupt an entire company for profit, what else might they be capable of? Around 2 a.m, exhausted but unable to sleep, I called the contact labeled PI on the secure phone. "Ms. Bennett," a gruff voice answered immediately. "I've been expecting your call." "You know who I am?" I asked, surprised. "Your father and I worked closely for the past 18 months. I know all about you. Michael Reeves, private investigator." "Did my father suspect his stroke might not have been natural?" I asked directly. A pause. "He had concerns about his Safety, yes. After he began collecting serious evidence against Reynolds and Harrington, he implemented significant security precautions. Nothing concrete to suggest they would go that far, but he didn't rule it out, I finished. Correct. The timing was certainly convenient for them. The succession plan was about to be changed formally. Your father had drafted documents removing Reynolds and initiating a board restructuring. This was new information. When was this happening? The board meeting was scheduled for next month. He wanted more ironclad evidence before making his move. I processed this, the timeline becoming clearer. So they might have known he was onto them. It's possible. Your father was careful, but Reynolds has eyes and ears throughout the company. That's why the Codicil strategy was so important, making them believe they'd won while setting up the counterattack. And now I have 60 days before the Codicil activates, I said. What do we do until then? We gather more evidence, build an airtight case, and identify everyone involved. Once the Codicil activates and you take control, we'll have one chance to clean house before they can react. And David, my brother, is he involved? Another pause. Your father didn't believe so. He thought David was being manipulated, positioned as the figurehead CEO specifically because they knew he lacked the financial acumen to spot what they were doing. That aligned with my own assessment. David had always been more focused on the content and public relations aspects of our business, leaving financial details to others. His strengths were in programming decisions and talent management, not forensic accounting. I need to access my father's home safe, I said. He mentioned additional documentation there. Too risky right now, Reeves countered. Reynolds has almost certainly placed someone in your family's household staff. Your sudden interest in your father's study would raise flags. So what's my next move? Exactly what they expect. The disappointed daughter accepting her diminished role. Return to California, maintain normal operations, appear to be focusing on your division rather than company-wide matters. Meanwhile, we continue building the case from the shadows. The strategy made sense, but it felt passive when every instinct screamed for immediate action. And just let them continue corrupting the company my grandfather founded. Let them potentially get away with. I couldn't bring myself to finish the thought. Not get away with anything, Reeves assured me. Your father created a dead man's switch. If the Codicil isn't activated as scheduled, if anything happens to you, for instance, everything we've gathered goes automatically to federal authorities and select journalists. They know they've won the first round. Let them believe that while we prepare to win the war. After ending the call, I stood at the window overlooking the city lights, my father's company buildings visible in the distance. The Bennett Media Group logo illuminated the night sky, a legacy 3 generations in the making, now corrupted from within. The funeral was tomorrow. I would have to face the board members, executives, and family friends who would offer condolences, while some among them knew they had benefited from my father's death. I would have to stand beside my brother as he was publicly acknowledged as the new leader of our company, knowing he was being set up as a pawn in their game. For the next 60 days, I would have to play the role of my life, the supportive sister, the dedicated division head, the professional who had accepted a disappointing outcome with grace, all while secretly building the case that would expose the corruption and reclaim my father's company. I thought of his letter, his faith in me, his meticulous planning even, as he suspected his life might be in danger. William Bennett had been a brilliant businessman, but his final strategic masterstroke was something none of us would have imagined him capable of, sacrificing his own legacy temporarily to ensure its ultimate salvation. The weight of responsibility settled over me, not just for the company or my father's memory, but for every employee whose livelihood depended on Bennett Media Group, every community served by our outlets, every principle of journalistic integrity we claimed to uphold. Morning came too quickly. gray light filtering through the hotel curtains I'd forgotten to close. I showered and dressed mechanically, selecting a conservative black dress for the funeral. The documents from last night were secured in the hotel safe. I couldn't risk bringing them to an event where so many potentially implicated people would be present. The funeral service was being held at Washington National Cathedral, a testament to my father's standing in the community. As I arrived, the scale of attendance became clear. Hundreds of mourners filing into the historic space, from media executives to politicians to celebrities whose careers had been launched on our networks. My mother and David waited at the entrance with Jennifer, receiving condolences from a steady stream of attendees. I joined them, slipping into the role of grieving daughter with surprising ease. Perhaps because the grief, at least, was entirely genuine. "You look exhausted," my mother whispered as I took my place beside her. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," I admitted. "Too many thoughts." She squeezed my hand sympathetically, assuming my sleeplessness stemmed from disappointment rather than the discovery of corporate conspiracy. The chairman of our board, Thomas Harrington, approached with practiced solemnity. At 65, he projected the distinguished gravitas of old media: silver hair, bespoke suit, the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. According to my father's files, he had orchestrated the suppression of 3 major investigative stories that would have exposed corruption in regulatory bodies overseeing our broadcasting licenses. "Catherine, David, Olivia," he greeted us, taking my mother's hands in his. "William's loss is devastating to us all. He was more than a business associate to me. He was a dear friend." I forced myself to accept his embrace when he turned to me, fighting the revulsion that threatened to show on my face. This man had betrayed everything my father stood for, potentially contributed to his death, and now stood here claiming friendship. "Thank you for coming, Thomas," I managed. "Dad always valued your guidance on the board." His eyes assessed me briefly, perhaps looking for signs that I knew more than I should. "William spoke often of your success in California. A shame you couldn't bring those talents back east more permanently." The subtle dig was delivered with such smooth precision that no one else would have caught it. A reminder of my supposed diminished status, an assertion of the victory he believed he'd secured. "The West Coast Division needed dedicated leadership," I replied with deliberate humility. Dad understood that better than anyone. Harrington nodded, seemingly satisfied with my apparent acceptance of defeat. "We'll need to discuss transition plans for your division soon. Perhaps early next week, once the immediate arrangements are behind us." "Of course. Whatever serves the company best." As he moved on to speak with David more privately, Marcus Reynolds approached. As CFO, Reynolds had been my father's right-hand man for financial matters, and, according to the evidence, the architect of the financial fraud schemes that had siphoned millions from the company. "Olivia, I'm so sorry," he said, his concern appearing genuine. Reynolds was in his early 50s, with a runner's lean build and the calculating eyes of someone constantly running numbers in his head. "Your father was immensely proud of what you built in California." "Thank you, Marcus." I met his gaze steadily, searching for any hint of the duplicity revealed in the files. "The quarterly projections you requested are almost complete. I should have them to you by Monday." "No rush," he assured me. "Take the time you need with family." "Work helps," I said simply. "Keeps me focused." Something flickered in his expression, approval perhaps, at what he perceived as my dedication to my narrow role rather than broader company concerns. "You're very much William's daughter in that respect." The service itself was a blend of dignity and genuine emotion. Former colleagues shared memories of my father's visionary leadership and personal kindness. A senator spoke of his contributions to media policy and journalistic standards. David delivered a moving eulogy that highlighted our father's legacy, his voice breaking only when speaking of the future William wouldn't see. I watched the proceedings with a strange sense of displacement, as if observing a performance where everyone had memorized their lines perfectly, but I alone knew the hidden plot beneath the script. How many people in this cathedral were complicit in corrupting my father's company? How many were innocent, genuinely mourning the man they'd respected? Throughout the service, I couldn't help scanning the mourners, mentally cross-checking faces against names in the files I'd reviewed. The vice president of advertising who had helped create the shell companies for skimming revenue, the news director who had killed investigative stories on command, the board members who had approved dubious financial reports without question. They all nodded solemnly at appropriate moments, dabbed at tears, exchanged mournful glances. The perfect picture of corporate grief. After the service, a smaller reception was held at my parents' home. As family members and close friends gathered in the living room, I found myself momentarily alone in the kitchen, refilling a water glass. "You're handling this with remarkable grace." I turned to find Richard Anderson, my father's attorney, watching me with thoughtful eyes. "Practice makes perfect," I replied quietly. 6 years of corporate diplomacy in California prepared me for maintaining appearances. He glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. "Have you reviewed the materials?" "Yes. And I understand why the approach my father designed is necessary, however much I might prefer a more immediate response." Richard nodded slightly. "Patience was never your strong suit, even as a child. Your father used to say you were like him that way, seeing 3 steps ahead and frustrated when others couldn't keep pace." "Did he confide in you about the extent of what he'd discovered?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Not specifics. He was protecting me as much as anyone. But I've handled the company's legal matters long enough to have my suspicions." He paused. "The Codicil timing wasn't arbitrary. 60 days gives certain quarterly financial filings time to be submitted, filings that might provide the final evidence needed. This was valuable information. The first quarter reporting. Due exactly 57 days from today," Richard confirmed. "After those filings are submitted to the SEC, altering previous records becomes much more difficult without triggering automatic alerts." Our conversation was interrupted as David entered the kitchen, his expression suggesting he'd heard at least part of our exchange. "What filings are you discussing?" he asked, a slight edge to his seemingly casual question. Richard recovered, seamlessly. "Just explaining to Olivia some of the standard legal transitions following your father's estate settlement. SEC notifications, regulatory disclosures, nothing that requires immediate attention." David seemed satisfied with this explanation, turning to me. "Several board members have asked to speak with you before you return to California. Would tomorrow morning work? We're gathering at headquarters for an informal transition meeting. The perfect opportunity to gauge who knew what and how they perceived me." "Of course. What time?" 9. Conference Room A. After David left, Richard gave me a warning look. "Be careful tomorrow. Listen more than you speak." "Always," I assured him. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of condolences and carefully worded conversations. By evening, as the last guest departed, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. The emotional toll of the funeral combined with the strain of maintaining my performance had left me drained. "You're not staying here tonight?" my mother asked as I gathered my purse, preparing to return to the hotel. "I have early morning. Calls with the California team," I explained. "It's easier from the hotel, with the time difference. I don't want to wake the household." She nodded, though disappointment showed in her eyes. "Will you come for dinner tomorrow night?" "Just family." "Of course," I promised, embracing her. "Get some rest, Mom. Today was difficult for everyone." Back at the hotel, I found a message from Michael Reeves, the private investigator, requesting an urgent meeting. 20 minutes later, he arrived at my suite. A surprise, as I'd expected another phone call rather than an in-person visit. Reeves was nothing like the noir detective I'd imagined from our phone conversation. In his early 50s, he had the unremarkable appearance of someone deliberately designed to blend into corporate settings. Medium height, medium build, neatly trimmed hair going gray at the temples, and a forgettable navy suit that could have come from any department store. "Sorry for the unexpected visit," he said after I'd verified his identity and let him in. "But after seeing the funeral, coverage, and the list of attendees, I thought this couldn't wait." "What's happened?" He placed a small device on the coffee table and activated it. "Signal disruptor," he explained. "Blocks any potential listening devices. Probably unnecessary, but your father insisted on such precautions whenever we met." Once the device was running, he continued, "3 things you need to know before tomorrow's board meeting. First, Marcus Reynolds met privately with Thomas Harrington immediately after the funeral for nearly 40 minutes in Harrington's car. Were you able to hear what they discussed?" "No, but their body language suggested disagreement. Harrington seemed to be issuing instructions that Reynolds wasn't entirely comfortable with." "Interesting. Perhaps their alliance wasn't as solid as it appeared in the files." "Second," Reeves continued, "David was approached separately by both men within an hour of that meeting. Again, I couldn't overhear, but he appeared confused after speaking with Reynolds, then reassured after Harrington spoke with him. They're coaching him, I surmised, preparing him for tomorrow's meeting, making sure he says what they want. Most likely. Which brings me to the third and most concerning development. Financial records are being moved or altered. Your father had placed a tracking program on the company's accounting servers before his stroke. It's been flagging unusual activity for the past 12 hours. Mass exports of historical data, modification timestamps on quarterly reports from previous years, user credential changes. They're covering their tracks, I said, the implications becoming clear. Removing evidence before the quarterly filings. Exactly. Whatever they're planning, they're accelerating the timeline. The meeting tomorrow isn't just a transition formality. I believe they're going to try to either shut down the California division entirely or place it under direct financial control from headquarters. My stomach tightened. That would give them access to all our separate accounting systems, client, relationships, everything my father kept deliberately isolated from the East Coast operations. And remove the last barrier to complete control of the company's financial reporting, Reeves confirmed. Your team in California is the only significant department still operating independently of Reynolds' financial oversight. So what's our countermove? I asked, my mind racing through options. If we wait until the Codicil activates in 60 days, there might not be a company left to save. Reeves considered this carefully. Your father anticipated the possibility they might move quickly after his death. That's why he left you the override option. Override option? What override option? He looked surprised. It wasn't in the materials. There should have been a letter explaining that, in emergency circumstances, Richard Anderson can activate the Codicil immediately with your authorization. I shook my head. There was nothing about an override, just the explanation of the 60-day timeline and the evidence files. Reeves frowned. That's concerning. Either your father changed plans without telling me, or someone intercepted part of what he intended me to receive. I finished, a chill running through me. Check the hotel safe, he suggested. Make sure everything is exactly as you left it. I moved to the closet where the safe was located, entered the code, and opened it. The briefcase and documents appeared undisturbed, but as I lifted the stack of papers, I noticed something odd. The hotel notepad beneath them, which I'd been using for notes, was perfectly aligned rather than at the slight angle I remembered leaving it. Someone's been in here, I said quietly. Everything looks the same, but it's too perfect, like it was carefully replaced rather than simply left untouched. Reeves immediately began checking the room systematically, looking under furniture, examining light fixtures, running his fingers along window frames. Near the desk, he paused, then carefully removed a tiny device adhered to the underside of the lamp base. "Listening device," he confirmed, showing me the nearly invisible bug. "Professional grade." Working silently, he continued his sweep, eventually finding 2 more devices, one near the bed and another by the entrance door. Rather than removing them, he left them in place, gesturing for me to follow him into the bathroom. He turned on the shower before speaking, the running water providing cover for our conversation. "Hotel security has been compromised," he said in a low voice. "We need to relocate you immediately. Do you have a friend in the area you can stay with? Someone not connected to the company or your family?" I thought quickly. "My college roommate lives in Georgetown. We've stayed in touch, but she's never had any connection to Bennett Media." "Perfect. Call her from the hotel phone to maintain the appearance that you're still here and arrange to stay. Pack a small bag with essentials. I'll create a diversion that will let you exit through the service area without being observed." 20 minutes later, I was in a taxi headed to Georgetown, having left my primary luggage in the hotel room with the lights on and TV playing. Reeves had triggered a minor plumbing emergency in a room down the hall, drawing security and maintenance staff away from the service elevator I used to depart. Andrea Gonzalez, my former roommate from Northwestern, greeted me with surprise but immediate hospitality when I arrived at her brownstone townhouse. Now a human rights attorney with no connections to the media world, she was perhaps the perfect safe harbor. "Corporate espionage? Seriously?" she asked after I provided a heavily edited explanation about needing a place to stay due to competitive issues following my father's death. "That seems extreme, even for media companies." "Succession plans bring out the worst in people," I replied, keeping details vague. "It's just for a few days until things settle down." "Mi casa es su casa," she said with the same generous spirit I remembered from our college days. "The guest room is yours for as long as you need it." Once settled in her spare bedroom, I used the secure phone to call Richard Anderson, explaining what had happened at the hotel and asking about the override option Reeves had mentioned. "There was indeed such a provision," Richard confirmed, his voice grave. "William left a sealed envelope with specific instructions that I was to give you that information only in person, not in the initial document packet." Why wouldn't he? Include it in his letter to me? He was concerned about exactly what seems to have happened: interception. The letter was intentionally incomplete, with the most sensitive aspects reserved for verbal communication only. So the override exists? You can activate the Codicil immediately if necessary? Yes, but the bar is high. Your father specified imminent and irreversible damage to the company as the standard. He was very concerned about moving too quickly before sufficient evidence was secured. "They're already altering financial records," I told him. "And tomorrow's board meeting appears designed to bring the California division under Reynolds' direct financial control." Richard was silent for a moment, considering. "That's concerning, but not necessarily meeting the threshold. If they're altering records, that actually creates new evidence of their wrongdoing. Digital forensics can reveal those changes. And if they completely absorb the California operations, dismantle the separate systems my father put in place specifically to maintain independent financial tracking, that would be closer to the threshold," he acknowledged. "Let's see what happens at tomorrow's meeting before making any irreversible decisions. Attend as planned, gather intelligence, but make no commitments regarding California's operations. Any significant changes should require formal board approval, not just executive directive. And if they push for immediate changes? Delay. Request time to properly transition your team. Insist on formal written protocols. Corporate bureaucracy can be a useful tool when you need to slow things down." After ending the call, I spent hours reviewing the evidence files again, looking for anything I might have missed that could help navigate tomorrow's meeting. Around 2 in the morning, something caught my attention, a pattern in the altered financial reports that might provide leverage. The fraudulent schemes weren't just about personal enrichment. They were designed to inflate Bennett Media Group's valuation ahead of a potential sale. Hidden in the board minutes were oblique references to strategic partnership opportunities and capital structure optimization, corporate euphemisms for selling the company. This explained the urgency. They weren't just covering up past fraud, they were preparing to cash out entirely. If Bennett Media Group were sold to a larger conglomerate, the new owners would eventually discover the financial discrepancies. But by then, the current leadership would have walked away with millions in sale proceeds. My father must have discovered these plans and recognized them as the ultimate betrayal of his legacy. Bennett Media Group wasn't just a business to William Bennett. It was a multi-generational commitment to journalism and community service. Selling it to the highest bidder would have violated everything he'd built. Armed with this insight, I finally fell asleep for a few hours before preparing for the board meeting. I chose my outfit carefully, a conservative navy suit that projected professionalism without appearing threatening. The goal was to be underestimated, to have them believe I'd accepted my reduced role and was merely focused on preserving my small corner of the company. Andrea lent me her car rather than having me call a taxi, an additional precaution against being tracked. As I drove to Bennett Media Group headquarters, the familiar glass tower in downtown D.C. where I'd spent my early career before the California assignment, I mentally rehearsed various scenarios for the meeting ahead. The executive floor was exactly as I remembered: plush carpeting, wood-paneled walls displaying journalism awards and historic front pages, the hushed atmosphere of power and tradition. The receptionist, who had known me since I was a child visiting my father's office, seemed uncertain how to greet me now. Was I still executive leadership, or had I been demoted to middle management by the will's terms? Ms. Bennett, she finally settled on, professionally neutral. The board is gathering in conference room A. Mr. Harrington asked that you join them as soon as you arrived. Thank you, Diane, I replied, deliberately warm and familiar. Small gestures to maintain allies throughout the building could prove valuable in the coming weeks. As I approached the conference room, I could see through the glass walls that most of the board had already assembled. David sat at my father's former position at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable with the symbolic placement. Thomas Harrington stood nearby, speaking intently with Marcus Reynolds. 3 other board members, all flagged in my father's files as either complicit or compromised, clustered together reviewing documents. I took a deep breath, centering myself before entering. The moment the door opened, conversations paused as all eyes turned to me. Olivia, Harrington greeted me with practiced cordiality. Thank you for joining us during this difficult time. Please, take a seat. I noticed he gestured toward a chair near the far end of the table, physically and symbolically distant from the leadership positions. A small but deliberate power play. Instead, I moved to the empty chair directly across from David. I think I'll sit here if no one minds. Better for eye contact during discussions. A flicker of annoyance crossed Harrington's face before he masked it with a smile. Of course. As I settled into the seat, I caught David's eye, trying to gauge his mental state. He seemed tense, his usual confidence replaced by a watchful uncertainty. Was he beginning to sense that he was being manipulated? Before we begin, Harrington continued, I want to acknowledge how difficult this transition is for the Bennett family. William's leadership was the cornerstone of this company for decades. David, Olivia, we all recognize your loss as both personal and professional. Murmurs of agreement circled the table, the obligatory moment of respect before business. Continued. That said, Harrington pivoted smoothly. William would want us to ensure the company's continued success and stability, which brings us to the primary purpose of today's meeting, formalizing the leadership transition and addressing immediate operational considerations. Marcus Reynolds distributed folders to everyone at the table. We've prepared a comprehensive transition plan that maintains operational continuity while implementing necessary structural adjustments. I opened the folder to find exactly what Reeves had predicted: a detailed plan to fully integrate the California division's financial and operational systems with headquarters, effectively eliminating the independence my father had deliberately established. As you'll see on page 3, Reynolds continued, we're proposing a streamlined reporting structure that centralizes all financial operations through the headquarters finance team. This eliminates redundancies and creates more consistent oversight across divisions. I reviewed the document carefully, noting how the innocuous corporate language masked the true purpose: to bring every aspect of the company's finances under Reynolds' direct control before the quarterly filings. The plan was meticulously crafted to appear as standard operational efficiency rather than the elimination of independent financial verification. I have some questions about the implementation timeline, I said, keeping my tone neutral. 6 weeks seems extraordinarily ambitious for integrating systems that were deliberately developed to operate independently. Reynolds smiled thinly. The separate systems have become an inefficiency we can no longer afford in today's competitive media landscape. The accelerated timeline ensures we capture immediate operational savings. And what will those savings be exactly? I asked. Innocently. I don't see any financial projections in the documentation. Reynolds glanced briefly at Harrington before responding. We estimate approximately $2 million annually in reduced administrative costs, primarily through elimination of redundant positions and processes. That's interesting, I replied. Since our current administrative costs for maintaining separate systems is only $8 million annually, according to last quarter's efficiency report. A momentary tension rippled through the room. Board members not involved in the conspiracy exchanged confused glances. Those figures don't capture all relevant costs, Reynolds countered smoothly. Indirect expenses, opportunity costs, and integration. Inefficiencies add substantially to the total. Perhaps we could see those calculations, I suggested, for due diligence purposes. We can certainly provide more detailed analysis, Harrington interjected, clearly trying to move past this uncomfortable line of questioning. But the broader, strategic benefits extend beyond simple cost savings. David, perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the proposed integration. All eyes turned to my brother, who looked momentarily caught off guard. He cleared his throat. I believe streamlining operations has merit, he began carefully. But I'm also conscious that our California division has been extraordinarily successful with its current structure. I'd like to understand more deeply what we might risk by rapid integration. It was a more measured response than I'd expected, suggesting David wasn't entirely under their thumb yet. A reasonable concern, I agreed, supporting his hesitation. The West Coast market operates differently than our traditional East Coast base. Our separate systems evolved specifically to address those differences. With all due respect, Harrington countered, maintaining parallel operations creates unnecessary complexity. In the event of a leadership transition, which we're experiencing now, that complexity becomes a liability. Or a safeguard, I suggested. Independent verification of financial reporting across divisions has been a cornerstone of our corporate governance for years. Dad was adamant about its importance. At the mention of my father, I noticed several board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Despite whatever corruption had infected the leadership, William Bennett's reputation for integrity still carried weight. William understood the value of strong controls, Reynolds acknowledged, but he also recognized the need for evolution. Before his stroke, we had discussed modernizing our approach. The lie was delivered with such confidence that had I not seen my father's private files, I might have believed it myself. In reality, My father had fought strenuously against every attempt to consolidate financial controls under Reynolds. "I'd be interested to see the minutes from those discussions," I said pleasantly, "for historical context as we move forward." Reynolds and Harrington exchanged glances. "They were informal conversations," Harrington clarified quickly. "Strategic, planning sessions rather than documented meetings." "I see," I replied, letting skepticism color my tone just slightly. "Well, regardless of past discussions, I'd like to propose an alternative approach. Given that we're midway through the quarterly reporting cycle, immediate integration creates unnecessary risk. Why not complete this quarter under existing systems, then implement changes for the next reporting period? That gives us time for proper planning, staff transition, and system testing." The suggestion was reasonable enough that rejecting it would raise obvious suspicions, even among board members not aware of the underlying fraud. "I think that's sensible," David added, surprising me with his support. "No need to rush changes during my initial transition as CEO. We can use this quarter to thoroughly evaluate the integration plan." Reynolds looked distinctly unhappy, but recovered quickly. "If that's your preference as CEO, David, we can certainly modify the timeline. However, I must emphasize that delayed integration perpetuates existing vulnerabilities in our financial reporting." "What specific vulnerabilities?" David asked sharply. The question hung in the air, unexpected and pointed. Reynolds wasn't prepared for direct questioning from his supposed puppet CEO. "It's more about process integrity than specific vulnerabilities," he backpedaled. "Reconciliation challenges between independent systems create inefficiencies. But we've managed those reconciliations successfully for years," I pointed out. "Our auditors have consistently approved our financial controls." Harold Winters, another board member implicated in my father's files, jumped in to support Reynolds. "The media landscape is changing rapidly. What worked in the past may not serve us going forward, particularly as we explore potential strategic partnerships." The phrase caught my attention immediately. Strategic partnerships? What specific partnerships are being considered? Harrington cleared his throat. "That's a topic for another meeting, but we've had preliminary discussions with several potential investors interested in Bennett Media Group's market position." "Investors or buyers?" I asked directly. The blunt question created immediate tension. Several board members looked surprised. Clearly not everyone had been privy to these discussions. "Exploratory conversations only," Harrington responded carefully. "No formal proposals have been entertained." But his eyes told a different story. The plans were far more advanced than he was admitting. "I wasn't aware we were considering ownership changes," David said, a new edge in his voice. "That seems like something that should have been explicitly disclosed during succession planning discussions." "It's very preliminary," Reynolds assured him. "Simply due diligence in today's consolidating media environment." I watched my brother carefully, seeing his confidence grow as he asserted his authority. "As CEO, I'd like a full briefing on all such discussions to date. Complete documentation, contact records, any preliminary valuations or proposals." "Of course," Harrington agreed, though I could see calculation behind his cordial expression. "We'll prepare a comprehensive overview by tomorrow," David E.T. specified, surprising me again with his directness. "That's quite rushed," Reynolds objected, "to properly compile everything." "By tomorrow," David repeated firmly. "This company isn't being sold without my complete understanding and approval of the rationale. My father built Bennett Media Group as an independent voice in journalism. That legacy deserves careful consideration." The meeting shifted to discussion of other transition matters, but the dynamic had changed subtly. David was showing unexpected backbone, and the conspiracy's carefully choreographed plans were encountering resistance. As the meeting concluded 2 hours later, I had accomplished my primary objective: preventing immediate changes to the financial reporting systems before the quarterly filings. The additional revelation about potential sale discussions provided new context for the urgency behind their maneuvers. David surprised me by asking me to stay behind as the others filed out of the conference room. Once we were alone, he dropped the careful CEO demeanor he'd been maintaining. "Something isn't right," he said without preamble. "Reynolds and Harrington have been pushing this financial integration while simultaneously exploring selling the company? That can't be coincidence." My estimation of my brother rose significantly. He might lack financial expertise, but his instincts were better than they'd given him credit for. "It does raise questions," I agreed cautiously, uncertain how much to reveal. "Why consolidate operations if you're considering selling to an entity that would likely implement their own systems anyway?" David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of our father when he was troubled. "Unless they need to control the financial reporting before any serious due diligence by potential buyers." The insight surprised me. That's a very good point. Dad always said buyers look at the last 4 quarters' performance more than anything else when valuing media companies, David continued. "If there were problems with our financials, controlling the reporting systems would be critical before shopping the company." A pivotal moment. How much could I trust David? How much should I reveal? "I need to tell you something," I said, making a decision. "But not here." David nodded, immediately understanding the need for caution. "My house. Tonight after dinner. With Mom. We can say we're going through Dad's personal items." Perfect. We rejoined the others for additional transition meetings throughout the day. I maintained the appearance of the supportive sister, offering helpful suggestions while seeming to accept my limited role in the new structure. Meanwhile, I used breaks to check in with Michael Reeves via the secure phone, updating him on the meeting's developments and David's unexpected potential as an ally. "Be extremely careful," Reeves warned. "They may be testing his loyalty by floating the sale idea. Watch for signs he's reporting back to Harrington or Reynolds." "My brother isn't a good enough actor to fake his reaction," I assured him. "And he's always been transparent about his ambitions. He wants to run the company, not sell it. Still, proceed with caution. If they suspect you're building an alliance with David, they might accelerate their timeline or take more drastic measures." That evening at my mother's house, dinner was surprisingly comfortable. The initial shock of my father's death had begun to give way to melancholy acceptance. My mother shared stories of their early days building the company. Memories I'd heard before, but now carried new weight, given what I knew about the threats to his legacy. "He was so proud of both of you," she said, looking between David and me. "He always said you had complementary strengths, David's programming, instincts, and people skills, Olivia's financial acumen and strategic vision. He believed together you could take Bennett Media places he never could." David and I exchanged glances, the weight of her words settling between us. Had our father always intended us to lead together rather than choosing one over the other? "Did Dad ever mention concerns about anyone in the company?" David asked carefully. "Any leadership conflicts or disagreements?" Our mother considered this. "He was troubled the past few months, working unusual hours, bringing files home, having hushed phone conversations. I assumed it was just business challenges, but..." She hesitated. "But what, Mom?" I prompted gently. "He said something odd about a week before his stroke. We were discussing retirement plans, and he said, 'Everything depends on getting the house in order first. Some things need to be fixed before I can step away.' When I asked what needed fixing, he just said, 'The foundation has cracks no one else can see yet.'" Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. My father had been preparing to address the corruption before his stroke intervened. After dinner, David and I excused ourselves to review the boxes of personal items from our father's office, as planned. My mother seemed pleased to see us working together, rather than maintaining the professional rivalry that had characterized our relationship for years. In David's car, driving to his Georgetown brownstone, he spoke first. "So, what couldn't you tell me at the office?" "It's complicated," I began, "and honestly, difficult to believe without evidence. But I think Dad discovered serious financial improprieties within the company before his stroke, possibly involving Reynolds and Harrington." Directly. David didn't seem as shocked as I'd expected. "I've suspected something might be wrong with our financials for months," he admitted. "The dividends have been increasing while our actual audience metrics have been declining. The math never quite added up." "You noticed that?" I asked, surprised. He smiled wryly. "I may not have your financial expertise, but I can recognize basic inconsistencies. I tried asking Reynolds about it once, and he gave me a patronizing lecture about revenue diversification strategies that explained nothing. At his house, we settled into his home office, away from potential listening devices. I decided to take the risk and reveal everything. The letter my father had left me, the evidence of financial fraud, the planned sale of the company, and the codicil that would transfer control to me in 60 days. David listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from concern to anger to resolve. When I finished, he was silent for several moments. "It all makes sense now," he finally said. "The way they've been managing me, limiting my access to financial systems, rushing this integration plan. They're not grooming me for leadership. They're setting me up as their puppet while they loot the company and sell it off." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And they need to control all financial reporting before the quarterly filings and any serious due diligence by potential buyers." "What's our play?" he asked, surprising me with his immediate alignment with my cause. "How do we stop them?" "You believe me?" I asked. "Just like that?" He looked at me directly. "You're my sister. We've competed professionally for years, but I've never known you to lie. And what you're saying fits too perfectly with the inconsistencies I've been noticing." His simple trust was unexpectedly moving. "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "why would you make up a story that ends with you taking control of the company through a secret codicil? If you were inventing something, you'd create a scenario where you got control immediately." His logic was sound, and I found myself smiling despite the gravity of our situation. "So, what's the plan?" he asked. Again, "Do we trigger the override and activate the codicil immediately?" I shook my head. "Not yet. We need more evidence. Concrete documentation of the fraud that will stand up in court. Right now, we have my father's suspicions and circumstantial evidence, but not the smoking gun that would ensure criminal charges. And we need to determine exactly who's involved," David added. "Clean out all the corruption at once, not just Reynolds and Harrington." Exactly. I was impressed by his strategic thinking. The quarterly filings are our opportunity. If we can access the unaltered financial data before Reynolds completes whatever changes he's making, we can document the fraud definitively. "I can request direct access to all financial systems," David suggested. "As new CEO performing due diligence, it would be expected." "But Reynolds will monitor what you access," I cautioned. "We need to be more subtle." David thought for a moment. "What about Richard Anderson? As corporate counsel, he has independent access for compliance purposes." "Good idea," I agreed. "Dad trusted him, and he knows about the codicil. Let me call him." Richard answered immediately when I used the secure phone. After explaining the situation, including David's involvement, he offered measured advice. "I can access the financial systems through legal compliance protocols," he confirmed. "But Reynolds will be watching those channels too. We need to be strategic about what we access and when." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "The quarterly audit preparation begins next week. As corporate counsel, I routinely review documentation before it goes to external auditors. That gives me legitimate reason to access the original transaction data without raising suspicions. But by then, won't Reynolds have already altered the records? David asked. Not necessarily, Richard explained. Financial manipulation of this magnitude requires a careful approach. They can't simply change numbers without creating traceable inconsistencies. They need to create plausible transactions that justify the discrepancies between actual and reported figures. And those transactions leave evidence, I realized. Digital footprints. Exactly. Especially if we can compare the system data before and after their manipulations. Richard paused. There's another option, but it's riskier. William installed a specialized auditing program on the financial servers before his stroke. Forensic tool that captures and timestamps all financial transactions. I have the access credentials. This was new information. Dad never mentioned this in his letter. It was implemented very recently, Richard explained, just weeks before his stroke. I helped him set it up through an independent cybersecurity firm to ensure no internal IT staff would know about it. It's been quietly logging everything since then. That's potentially our smoking gun, David said excitedly. Can we access the logs remotely? No, that's the challenge. The program was deliberately isolated from external access for security reasons. Someone needs to physically download the data from a specific terminal in the IT department. I considered our options. That's too obvious. Reynolds would be alerted immediately if either of us accessed that terminal. What about someone else? David suggested. Someone who would have legitimate reason to be there? Richard nodded. I've been considering that. The head of IT security, Janet Kwan, worked closely with your father on various cybersecurity initiatives. William trusted her explicitly, and she's not connected to Reynolds or Harrington in any meaningful way. Can we trust her with this? I asked, wary of bringing more people into our confidence. I believe so. She helped your father install the monitoring program, though she wasn't aware of its specific purpose. He told her it was a security measure to prevent external hacking. We need to approach her carefully, David cautioned. If she's compromised, or if word gets back to Reynolds that we're investigating. I'll handle it, Richard assured us. I can meet with her under the pretext of routine security compliance review, test her reactions before revealing anything sensitive. We spent the next hour developing a comprehensive strategy. David would maintain the appearance of a newly minted CEO learning the ropes, requesting general briefings across all departments without focusing suspiciously on finance. I would return to California as expected, maintaining normal operations while quietly securing backup copies of all West Coast financial data. Richard would approach Janet Kwan and, if she proved trustworthy, coordinate the extraction of the monitoring program's data. There's one more resource we should consider, I mentioned, thinking of Michael Reeves. The private investigator Dad hired has been gathering evidence independently. He might have insights we're missing. Can he be brought in without raising suspicions? David asked. He's been operating covertly for months, I assured him. No one at the company knows about his involvement. Set up a meeting, David decided. Somewhere secure, away from anyone connected to Bennett Media. As we finalized our plans, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The grief of losing our father remained raw, but it was now accompanied by purpose and a glimmer of hope. We had a chance to save his legacy and expose those who had betrayed him. David walked me to my car when we finished. Before I got in, he surprised me by pulling me into a hug, something we hadn't done in years. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for letting the competition between us become so bitter. Dad was right. We're stronger together than we ever could be separately. I'm sorry too, I replied, genuinely moved. I've been so focused on proving myself that I never considered we might both be right for different aspects of leadership. If we get through this, he said as he released me, I think we should talk about a different kind of future for Bennett Media. One where we lead together rather than one or the other of us taking control. The suggestion was unexpected, but felt right. Dad might have been planning that all along, I mused, using the crisis to force us to recognize each other's strengths. That would be very like him, David agreed with a sad smile. Always the strategic thinker, even from beyond the grave. The next morning, I attended a series of transition meetings at headquarters, maintaining the appearance of the cooperative division head preparing to return to California. Reynolds seemed more relaxed, apparently believing he'd successfully delayed any threat to his financial consolidation plans. In a private moment between meetings, Harrington approached me with his usual smooth charm. "Olivia, I've been meaning to check in with you personally," he began, his tone carefully calibrated to suggest genuine concern. "I know this transition must be difficult, given your contributions to the company." "I'm focused on what's best for Bennett Media Group," I replied neutrally, as my father would have wanted. "Precisely the attitude we need," he nodded approvingly, "which is why I wanted to discuss your future role more specifically. The West Coast Division has flourished under your leadership, but with the proposed integration, there might be opportunities to expand your responsibilities in new directions." The attempted manipulation was transparent, offering vague future rewards in exchange for current cooperation. "I'm always open to discussing how I can best serve the company," I responded, deliberately non-committal. "What did you have in mind?" "The board has been considering creating a new position, Executive Vice President of International Development. Given your success expanding our presence in California and the Asian Pacific market, you'd be the natural choice to lead our global strategy." The offer was surprising and suspicious. Bennett Media Group had minimal international operations, and expansion had never been part of our strategic plan. This was either a hollow title designed to placate me, or more likely, a way to remove me from day-to-day operations where I might observe financial irregularities. "That's an intriguing possibility," I said, feigning interest. "Would this position be based in California or require relocation to headquarters?" "We envision a significant travel component," Harrington replied smoothly. "Asia, Europe, potential markets in South America. You'd have offices in both New York and London, with a substantial budget for market development." Exactly as I suspected, they wanted me as far from the company's financial centers as possible. "It sounds like an exciting opportunity," I said with practiced enthusiasm. "I'd love to see a formal proposal once the immediate transition period is complete." "Wonderful. I'll have my team draft something for your review next week." As Harrington walked away, I couldn't help but marvel at the elaborate efforts being made to neutralize me while maintaining appearances. They clearly saw me as a threat, but were attempting to manage that threat through misdirection rather than confrontation. That afternoon, I met with my California team via video conference, providing updates on the transition while privately assessing which team members could be trusted if we needed operational support during our investigation. My CFO for the West Coast Division, Priya Sharma, had always demonstrated impeccable integrity and attention to detail. If anyone would have noticed inconsistencies between our regional reporting and headquarters' consolidated financials, it would be her. After the official meeting ended, I asked Priya to stay on for a private conversation. "Priya, I have a somewhat unusual request," I began once we were alone. "I'd like you to personally review all our financial transactions from the past year, with particular attention to how our reported numbers were treated in the consolidated statements from headquarters." Her expression turned thoughtful. "Any specific concerns I should be looking for?" "Discrepancies in revenue recognition, unexpected adjustment entries, changes in accounting methodology between what we submitted and what appeared in the final reports." Priya's sharp eyes narrowed slightly. "This is about more than standard reconciliation, isn't it?" I trusted her, but caution was still necessary. Let's just say I'm conducting a thorough review of our processes during this transition. Period. If you find anything that seems unusual, please document it thoroughly but discuss it only with me directly. Understood. She nodded, her expression serious. I've actually noticed some peculiarities in how headquarters has been treating our digital advertising revenue. Nothing. Definitively improper, but inconsistent with generally accepted accounting principles. This caught my attention immediately. Can you elaborate? In our last 3 quarterly submissions, I flagged several large digital advertising contracts, where revenue recognition seemed accelerated at the consolidated level compared to our regional reporting. When I inquired, the explanation from headquarters finance was that they were applying a more aggressive interpretation of revenue recognition standards based on contract commitment rather than delivery of services. And you disagreed with that interpretation? It's technically defensible but unusual for a media company, she explained. More importantly, it wasn't consistently applied, only to certain contracts with specific clients. Which clients? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual despite my racing pulse. Priya consulted her notes. Primarily Meridian Investments, Atlantic Partners, and Vista Horizons Group. The names meant nothing to me immediately, but I made a mental note to cross-reference them with my father's files. Thank you, Priya. This is exactly the kind of detailed review I need. Please continue your analysis and report directly to me with anything else you find. After ending the call, I immediately texted Michael Reeves with the 3 company names. Within 20 minutes, he called on the secure line. Those companies are all shell corporations, he stated without preamble. They appear to be legitimate advertising clients, but they all trace back to a holding company called Apex Consortium. And who controls Apex Consortium? That's where it gets interesting. The ownership is deliberately obscured through multiple layers, but your father's investigation had begun to unravel it. The primary beneficial owner appears to be Thomas Harrington himself, operating through a series of trusts and offshore entities. The pieces were falling into place. So Harrington is essentially paying himself through fake advertising contracts with Bennett Media Group. Exactly. The money flows from Bennett Media to these shell companies, then through various channels back to Harrington and likely others involved in the scheme. Meanwhile, Bennett Media books the payments as legitimate revenue, inflating the company's performance. And with artificially inflated performance metrics, I began. The company appears more valuable to potential acquirers, Reeves finished. Based on the scale of these transactions, they could be inflating the company's valuation by as much as 30-40% ahead of a potential sale. We need to document all of this conclusively, I said. When can you meet with David and me to coordinate our next steps? Tomorrow night. I've arranged a secure location, a private room at the Westbridge Hotel registered under an alias. I'll text the details to this phone. Later that evening, I received a call from Richard Anderson with news about Janet Kwan, the IT security director. I met with her this afternoon, he reported. Started with general discussion of cybersecurity, protocols, then carefully introduced the topic of your father's special monitoring program. Her reaction was immediate and genuine concern about whether it was still operating correctly since his death. So you think she's trustworthy? Yes. When I hinted that there might be concerns about internal financial systems, she mentioned she'd noticed unusual access patterns to accounting databases in recent weeks, after-hours logins, mass data exports, modifications to transaction journal entries. Did she report these concerns? She flagged them for Marcus Reynolds, as head of finance, Richard explained. He told her it was part of a planned system upgrade and database cleaning ahead of a software migration. A convenient explanation, I noted wryly. Indeed, when I suggested there might be more to it, she became quite concerned. She clearly respected your father enormously and seemed genuinely disturbed by the possibility that someone might be compromising systems he had built. Did you tell her about Our suspicions? Not specifically, but I established that she would be willing to help with a confidential security review authorized by you and David as William's children, regardless of the official chain of command. Perfect. Can she access the monitoring program data? Yes, but she'll need to do it carefully to avoid detection. She suggested coming in on Saturday when the office is nearly empty, ostensibly to perform routine security maintenance. This Saturday? Yes, the timing works in our favor. The quarterly financial reconciliation begins Monday, so we need the unaltered data before Reynolds and his team make their adjustments. Events accelerated dramatically over the next 48 hours. David and I met with Michael Reeves at the secure hotel location, combining our intelligence and formulating an action plan. Janet Kwan successfully extracted the monitoring program data, providing us with irrefutable evidence of systematic financial manipulation dating back nearly 2 years. The fraud was even more extensive than we'd initially feared, over $18 million, in falsified revenue, manipulated expenses, and diverted funds. By Sunday evening, we had assembled a comprehensive case file documenting every aspect of the scheme. The evidence was devastating: falsified advertising contracts, fabricated revenue, hidden payments to shell companies, and explicit communications between Harrington, Reynolds, and 2 other board members discussing the revenue enhancement strategy and plans to maximize valuation before the sale. Most damning was a recorded conversation between Harrington and Reynolds discussing the need to accelerate the timeline following my father's stroke, with Harrington explicitly stating, "With William out of the picture, we can finally move forward without interference." With Richard Anderson's guidance, we made the difficult decision to activate the Codicil's override provision. The evidence of imminent and irreversible damage to the company was undeniable. Plans were already in motion to announce a potential sale to Global Media Enterprises, a conglomerate known for dismantling acquired companies and selling off their assets. Monday morning, I arrived at headquarters alongside David. Rather than attending the scheduled executive committee meeting, we proceeded directly to the boardroom where Richard had convened an emergency board session with those directors not implicated in the fraud. Janet Kwan and 2 trusted IT staff had secured the building's systems overnight, preventing any last-minute evidence tampering. When Harrington and Reynolds arrived, confusion quickly turned to alarm as they found themselves facing not just David and me, but federal agents from both the FBI and SEC who had been quietly brought into the case over the weekend. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrington demanded, his usually smooth demeanor cracking. David stood, projecting a calm authority I'd never seen in him before. "Thomas Harrington and Marcus Reynolds, you are being removed from your positions at Bennett Media Group, effective immediately. Federal authorities are here to investigate financial fraud, securities violations, and potential criminal conspiracy." The look of shocked betrayal on Reynolds' face when he realized David was not the malleable puppet they'd anticipated was almost satisfying. His eyes shifted to me with dawning horror as he began to understand. "This is preposterous," Harrington blustered. "You have no authority." "Actually," Richard interjected, placing a document on the table, "Ms. Bennett has controlling authority as of this morning. The codicil to William Bennett's will has been activated, transferring majority ownership and chairmanship to Olivia Bennett, effective immediately." The room erupted in chaos as agents began serving warrants and the uninvolved board members reacted with shock to the evidence being presented. Throughout it all, David stayed by my side, a united front, finally honoring our father's true vision for the company. The weeks that followed were grueling but transformative. Harrington, Reynolds, and their co-conspirators faced federal charges. 3 board members resigned immediately. The company's stock initially plummeted when the fraud was disclosed, but stabilized when we announced a new leadership structure. David as CEO focusing on content and external relationships, me as chairwoman. and CFO overseeing strategy and financial integrity. Together, we would rebuild Bennett Media Group with the values our father had always intended. 6 months later, standing at the podium during our first shareholder meeting under the new leadership, I looked out at the audience and caught sight of my mother in the front row, tears of pride in her eyes. Bennett Media Group was founded on principles of integrity, independence, and journalistic excellence, I began. Today, we recommit to those founding values while charting a course for the future, not as individuals pursuing separate ambitions, but as a team combining diverse strengths toward a common purpose. David joined me at the podium, the symbolism clear to everyone. The true inheritance our father left wasn't just a company, he added. It was a legacy of courage, integrity, and vision that transcends any single person. Together, we honor that legacy not by preserving the past, but by building a future worthy of his name. As we concluded our presentation to resounding applause, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. What had begun as a story of betrayal and exclusion had transformed into something I'd never anticipated. A partnership with my brother that made both of us stronger than either could have been alone. The secret Codicil hadn't just changed who controlled the company. It had changed us, healing family wounds and creating something better than either of us had imagined possible. That was our father's true final gift, not the company itself, but the wisdom to recognize that we were always meant to lead it together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.